Hello there and welcome to another special live broadcast as part of our How Green is Scotland investigation. Over the course of this week, we have been showcasing a joint investigation between the Herald and the Ferret. My name is Jack Aitchison and I'm the live editor at the Herald, and I'm joined today by Rob Edwards, a journalist with the Ferret. Now, with all eyes on Glasgow ahead of COP26, we've been answering some of the burning questions in Scotland's climate fight. And today we revealed that Scotland's rivers, lochs, burns and canals are in the worst state on record. We use interactive tables to map out what that means for your local waterway, and we brought to light that nearly 50 sites run by Scottish Water have been deemed unsatisfactory by Scotland's environmental watchdog. The full investigation, which is running all this week, has been available in print, so be sure to grab a copy. And you can also get it online for Herald subscribers. They can take up an offer to become one for £2 for 2 months at heraldscotland.com/subscribe. And of course, you can also view it on the Ferret, taking up their offer of £3 for 1 month at theferret.scot. Now, as I say, I'm joined by Rob Edwards from the Ferret to talk about today's investigation. Now, Rob, this investigation was done by your colleague, Jamie Mann, but you're here to talk about it. You've had, obviously, you're heavily involved in the Ferret project. Are you able just to start off by telling me a bit about today's story? What were the key findings?
Hi, Jack. Good to be back. Because we're nearing the end of this week's environmental stories, How Green is Scotland stories. But we're still, I hope, revealing things that are of concern to people. As you say, my colleague Jamie Mann's story in the Herald this morning and on the Ferret looks at water pollution, essentially. And what he's done is analyse the latest data from the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, the Scottish Government's green watchdog, and looked at how they classify all waterways. So that's rivers, lochs, canals, everything. And it paints a fairly dramatic picture. So altogether, there's about 400 of Scotland's waterways damaged by water pollution and other problems in 2019, which is what the latest data is. In fact, the numbers show that the number classified as bad by SEPA, that's ecologically bad, having a bad natural environment, more than doubled between 2018 and 2019. And SEPA accepts that there are significant environmental problems. Having said that, you have to caveat it by saying that doesn't mean that Scotland's waterways got suddenly very bad between 2018 and 19. What it more likely means is that SEPA's analysis, the Scottish Environment Protection Agency's analysis, got more sophisticated and got better. And they were able to more accurately say which of Scotland's rivers were bad. But it still means that the number of Scotland's waterways recorded as poor in 2019 is a record high since SEPA started taking these records. Partly because pollution is continuing, and partly because SEPA are getting better at analysing what the state of the rivers is. So that's quite a dramatic picture. And, we're talking about rivers that people will be familiar with. So many of the rivers rated as poor or bad by SEPA are well known. So they include long stretches of the Ormond, the Carron, the Dee, the Don, the Erne, the Esk, the Kelvin, the Lossy, Nairn, Nith, Spey, Tye, Tunnel, and the Water of Leith, amongst others. And some of the lochs, which are rated as having poor or bad ecological status, include Loch Orr, Loch Doon, Loch Drunkie, Loch Katrine, and Loch Leven. So it's a fairly comprehensive look at the rather poor state of a lot of Scotland's waterways.
Absolutely, and you mentioned there some well-known areas, some places that people will know. I should add, and I mentioned it at the top of the broadcast, that you can view on both the Herald and the Ferret. We have extensive data, some interactive things like searchable tables. Go and find your local loch, go and find your local river, and see just how much, how well that ranked. Because I did it this morning, I did it yesterday, and I found it quite eye-opening that my local one was deemed bad, where I know that I've been swimming there all my life. So one for maybe wild swimmers to have a look at. Moving on, I think you mentioned there, part of this is down to pollution, part of this is down to the fact that SEPA are getting better in their ways of sort of analysing these things. Campaigners, though, will also argue that this has got worse due to climate change, and I assume this is what they've said in the piece. Can we talk through some of their points?
Yeah, that's right. Campaigners, of course, said that the pollution of the rivers and lochs was unacceptable, and wanted SEPA to have more teeth. They pointed out that freshwater species, wildlife in the rivers and lochs were going extinct more rapidly than others. Even experts accepted that the picture wasn't pretty, and that climate change could make it worse. So yeah, that's the problem. I mean, the pollution comes from all sorts of different things, right? So people, factories polluting rivers, farmers, things running off, from farms, or people changing the flow or the way the river runs. All of these things can change the kind of ecological status of the river. One of the big things too, which I'm sure we'll come on to talk about, is the amount of sewage that's still discharged into rivers by sewage plants run mostly by Scottish Water. So,
I was going to touch on that. I think there was a key part in the story was referencing the River Almond in West Lothian, and there was a pretty bad issue with sewage there, or would believe to be a bad issue. I guess that's maybe a good point to follow on with then.
Yeah, the River Almond is a lovely river. I've walked along it myself. I haven't swum in it, but I have walked along it, and we did a story earlier that revealed that sewage was discharged into the river 500 times in 2019, and obviously that's damaging for freshwater wildlife like fish and insects. And there is a local action group, the River Almond Action Group, which of course has been campaigning against all these leaks, and say that describe the Almond as all too sadly having its rivers and riverbeds strewn with sewage-related debris, which is obviously not acceptable to the community in the 21st century. So something the campaigners argue definitely needs to be done about this.
Absolutely, yeah, quite unpleasant for sure. As I mentioned, we do have lots of interactive data. Thank you for everyone who's been engaging with us so far. We have left comments, so whether you're viewing this on Facebook, or on Twitter, or on YouTube, whether you're viewing on the Ferret or on the Herald, please leave your comments below. We'll do our best to get back to them. I'll put them to Rob, and we can see what we can do. But we'd love to hear your points and see what we can do there. And as I said, of course, before, we're talking about the River Almond. What about your river? View the Herald, view the Ferret online, and you'll be able to have a look right into that, deep dive into that data and see the quality of your river and loch and various other waterways. The next point, Rob, I wanted to come on to was about the impact of the quality of water on Scotland's native fish. Not the easiest to say, fish species. We've quoted the Fisheries Management Scotland within the piece. What's their view? Obviously, it's quite damaging to things like salmon fishing.
Yeah, Fisheries Management Scotland, which is an organisation that represents all the rivers which anglers use for fish across Scotland, pointed out that native fish species need access to cold, clean water, and that if the water's not cold and clean, it can damage wild salmon and trout. And they said we need to, increase our efforts to improve the ecological status of our rivers. And they highlight problems from agricultural runoff on sewage. Some organisations taking too much water, that's called abstraction from the river, which can also have an ecological effect on the river and the way it flows. So yeah, we also heard from the Scottish Wildlife Trust, who obviously are concerned about wildlife, and they said much the same things and pointed out, of course, that the whole thing's connected. So streams flow into rivers and lochs, which all flow into the sea. So if you get small pressures high upstream, they can build up into serious pressures downstream. So you need to manage, they argue, the whole thing collectively, and look at it, in a holistic way. So So yeah, it's personally, I think as someone who's written about environmental things a lot, the work that Jamie's done here on focusing on rivers is much needed, because generally speaking, there's not been as much focus on the pollution of our rivers as there has been, on other environmental issues such as air pollution. So I think it's very important. It's very important that the fact that our waterways are in a poor condition, or a lot of them, doesn't go unnoticed and unremarked, and is something that politicians and decision makers are aware of.
Absolutely. Now, this topic, today's investigation about water pollution, is part of a week-long major investigation launched by the Herald and the Ferret. We've had countless stories, front pages in the Herald in the last few days, about things like air pollution that Rob's just mentioned there. And the full investigation, which is running all week, is available in print, and it's also available online for Herald subscribers. You can become a Herald subscriber by taking up a £2 for 2-month offer at heraldscotland.com/subscribe. And of course, you can also view it on the Ferret as well, taking up their offer of £3 for 1 month at theferret.scot/subscribe. Rob, I want to move on to the second sort of key story now that we had today from Jamie, and it was about Scottish Water and findings around them. Do you want to talk to me maybe just in a bit of detail about what that second story was all about?
Yes, I mean, this is related, obviously, to the state of Scotland's waterways, but it comes from data that was hacked from SEPA in last Christmas and released online by as a result of a criminal cyber attack. So SEPA won't comment on it officially, or won't officially confirm it. But we have verified the data, as we did earlier with the data on big polluters, which I talked to you about earlier this week. And we believe it's very much in the public interest that it becomes public. And if you look at the information, what's called SEPA's annual compliance assessment, where they're assessing the sort of pollution performance of all Scotland's companies, one of the companies and one of the areas where the problem is at its worst is with Scottish Water and their sewage plants. The data shows that in 2018, which is what the latest data, the latest year we have the data for. Have I got that right? Is it 2009? No, it's 2000. It's 2019. I beg your pardon. 2019 data we have that is the latest data, and from SEPA shows that nearly 50 sites run by Scottish Water, including their sewage and wastewater treatment plants, are rated as either poor, very poor, or at risk, i.e. altogether unsatisfactory by SEPA. That's a lot, obviously, and it makes Scottish Water, I'm afraid, in the running for being one of Scotland's worst polluters, along with others. That's because they have a huge, ancient infrastructure of sewage works all over Scotland, some big, some large, that are all very old, and sometimes they overflow when it rains a lot. Sometimes they have leaks, and obviously the sewage in them, whether treated or partially treated, ends up in rivers and waterways. So that's quite a problem. And you can see from the data which sewage works are the worst. So there's one in Orkney, for example, and one in Falkirk that were in SEPA's 2019 draft assessments rated as very poor. And there were other sewage works, rated performing poorly in Shotts, North Lanarkshire, and Bowness near Falkirk. So Scottish Water has to take some responsibility for the state of some of Scotland's rivers. Yeah.
You spoke there about how the fact, it's overflowing sometimes when there's heavy rainfall can cause parts of these issues. And so I guess you can argue then, and I guess Scottish Water could argue that climate change is partly to blame for what's happening here.
Oh, yeah, of course. And obviously we went to Scottish Water and asked them to respond to this situation. And of course they stress they've got a very large infrastructure. They're investing lots in doing what they can to reduce the problems, and they've made various improvements at specific places. So they've made improvements at Bowness, which I mentioned there, and they have, and they point out, of course, that although there are 50 unsatisfactory Scottish water sites, there are hundreds, maybe 700 or so, that are not unsatisfactory. So they have around 800 sites. Well, no, they have about 770 sites altogether. So, the fact that 50 of them are bad means that most of them are okay. So, they obviously make that argument, which is fair enough. But clearly, more work needs to be done. Campaigners would certainly argue that in making sure that the ones that do leak, the ones that do overflow, and the ones that do cause problems, more needs to be done about them. And I think, without giving too much away, I think this is a topic that we will be returning to.
Yeah, well, as you say, we do have, we're obviously, it's Friday today, but we are running the Ferret investigation, the How Green is Scotland, over the weekend. So you'll be able to pick up an edition on Saturday and Sunday with further stories, key stories. I think tomorrow's story especially is going to be quite eye-opening for some people. And we are hopefully, as it currently plans, we will be having a broadcast on Sunday as well. So be sure to tune in for that. I guess, just lastly, before we do have that then, Rob, because I believe you won't be on the next broadcast. But so far this week, we've discussed things like big polluters, we've discussed air pollution, now we're talking about water pollution. Generally speaking, with COP26 over, on the horizon, I can't not mention COP26 with everything. I feel like every second story I look at nowadays is about COP26. What picture are we painting here? What picture has been painted of Scotland to the eyes of people coming from overseas?
Of course, you're asking me to summarise a very complicated situation in a very simple way. But don't make
it easy for you.
I'll do my best. That to suggest that all is well in Scotland's environment is not the case. There have been. Don't get me wrong, there have been great strides forward and some things have improved for sure. And there's certainly a lot more transparency about the state of Scotland's environment than there has been in the past. But, with the number of companies that break environmental rules, the extent of air pollution, which, we importantly revealed is now going to be the subject of an investigation by a government agency, which it means that more is going to happen on that. And the water pollution we've been talking about, and the state of Scotland's wildlife, which we've also talked about. There are issues with all of them in Scotland, and it would be wrong to maintain that everything is rosy. And far be it for me to criticise politicians. I'm just a humble journalist, but sometimes it sounds like politicians make things sound slightly better than they actually are.
Okay.
And just to add one thing to that, sorry, Jack.
Yes.
You mentioned the story that's coming tomorrow. Again, without giving it away, I agree with you that I think that's by another colleague of mine, Paul Dobson, and it's more directly relates to Scotland and its achievements in combating climate change. And I think it will play directly into when it's published tomorrow. Play directly into the run up to COP, which of course now is only just over a week away. So.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, eyes peeled for that tomorrow. On that note, I think we're going to come to bring this sort of stream to an end. I do have to add that we did have a special edition of the Brian Taylor podcast yesterday. We had journalists from the Ferret on. It was all about this How Green is Scotland investigation. So it's well worth having a look at. And you can find that on all good streaming devices. It's the Brian Taylor podcast on those services like Spotify and what have you. Thank you, Rob. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate your time as always, and thank you for the audience who've joined in. And apologies that we couldn't get around to sort of all the comments that have came in. A final plug from me is that this How Green is Scotland investigation is running all this week. We are continuing into Saturday and Sunday in print, and you can also get it online for Herald subscribers. You can become one by taking out a £2 for 2-month offer at heraldscotland.com/subscribe. You can, of course, also view it on the Ferret by taking up their offer of £3 for 1 month at theferret.scot/subscribe. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, Jack.